When you look at these two diverging realities, where on one hand, cases are going up, deaths are rising, and on the other hand, we're on the eve of the federal social distancing guidelines expiring, and at least 31 states partially reopening in different ways. What is your message overall tonight to people who may be confused by these, sort of different realities?
Anderson, the message is to take a look at the clearly articulated guidelines for opening America again. And if you take a look at them, even though the so-called 30-day mitigation period has ended, the first component of opening America again is what we call a gateway, which means that you need to have to go down over a 14-day period, incremental or decremental decreases in the number of cases that you have before you can even think about going to phase one. And then you stay a certain time in phase one, and then there's another checkpoint before you go to phase two, and another checkpoint before you go to phase three. So there really is, if you follow the guidelines, there's a continuity that's safe, that's prudent, and that's careful. So the concern that I have is that there are some states, some cities or what have you, who are looking at that and kind of leapfrogging over the first checkpoint. And I mean, obviously you could get away with that, but you're making a really significant risk that if you do that and you don't have in place the absolute clear-cut capability of identifying, isolating, and doing the contact tracing when people do start blipping. Because there's no doubt in my mind that when you pull back mitigation, you're going to start seeing cases crop up here and there. And if you're not able to handle them, you're going to see another peak, a spike. And then you almost have to turn the clock back to go back to mitigation. So that's the reason why I keep trying to articulate to the public and to the leaders, take a look at the guidelines. They don't tell you because you've reached the end of the 30-day mitigation period that all of a sudden you switch a light on and you just go for it. That's not the way to do it. Each state, each city, each region is going to be a little different. And there may be some situations where people can go into that pretty quickly because they've already passed the first gateway. But others should not do it if they're still on the way up and they haven't plateaued. So that's really my concern.
And it doesn't appear, at least from when we look at the data, that anyone sort of any state meets these criteria fully at this point. So, I mean, it sounds like none of these states should be reopening, but is this going to be sort of incremental infections, do you think, or do places like where I live here in Georgia, do you think you could potentially see exponential growth? Again, a few cases and then suddenly really taking off again?
Well, you don't know for sure, but I don't think that you will see something as explosive as we saw in New York because of the special characteristics of that city, which made them vulnerable, or even in New Orleans, which had a very sharp peak and then came down very nicely. What I think you'll see is these spikes, like in certain areas, nursing homes, plants where workers congregate, prisons and places like that. So when you look at the chart, that's where you'll see it. The thing you'll really get into trouble if it spills over into the general community the way it did in New York City. Because if you can't stop that from happening, then I think you're really going to see the sharp peak that is going to be very disturbing when that happens, because it's really going to take a while to get it back down. But I must say that, you know, the discretion is given to the governors. They know their states. The mayors know their cities. So you want to give them a little wiggle room. But my recommendation is, you know, don't wiggle too much. Try as best as you can to abide by the guidelines that were very well thought out and very well delineated. Some of them are doing that, but others are taking a bit of a chance. I hope they can actually handle any rebound that they see.
Can you talk about the development, like sort of the race to develop a coronavirus vaccine? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of people all around the world, a lot of different companies, governments working on this. Do they work together? Is this kind of a battle, a rush to try to be the first one to get it out there?
No, you know, I don't think, Anderson, that it's a rush to get it out there to beat somebody else. I mean, everybody wants to get a vaccine for their country, for the safety of their country, and if possible, make it available to the world. I mean, I can only speak for what we're doing. We have a core group of a number of candidates that we at the NIH and the FDA and other agencies within the government, the DOD, including the Department of Defense, are working together now to try and get a situation where we can get something that's done, that's safe, that's effective, that's quick, and that you could scale up. Because each of those are really important. I mean, to just say, I have a vaccine, throw it into people, what people don't appreciate, because they're so attent to getting a vaccine quickly, is that there could be deleterious negative effects of enhancement of infection. So you got to make sure you don't get slowed down by that, but you're aware there are safety issues. And then what we're going to do is we're in phase 1 now, which means we're looking predominantly at immediate safety and some immunogenicity, namely, does it induce the kind of response you want it to? We're going to go quickly as we get into the summer into a phase 2-3. We're going to go right into it, looking at safety and looking at immunogenicity. Now, if there are cases that are around, either here in the United States, which likely there will be some, or some of our international sites, because we have clinical sites that we put together years and years ago for HIV and for influenza and for other things. If we get in there and there are a number of infections, you can get an efficacy signal right away, which means you may know right ahead of time whether or not you have something that works. But importantly, what's being done now that's different than what most situations are is that before we even know a vaccine works, we're going to have to make the investment in hundreds of millions of dollars to start developing a vaccine so that when you ultimately prove it works, you don't have to wait 5 or 6 months to scale up to get enough doses to give to a meaningful number of people. That's a risky financial circumstance, but it certainly is worth the risk, given what's at stake.
Dr. Fauci, you seem to have struck a bit of a more optimistic tone about vaccines. I know that you said a year from this past January would be next January, but still, I felt like you were trying to give some good news at that point. You actually thought it would take even longer. Now, do you really think that January is realistic? I mean, with everything that we know right now?
Well, Anderson, I think, Sanjay, I'm sorry, everything falls into place right, it will happen. But there are a number of situations there that could go wrong. Like it may all of a sudden have a safety signal. Oops, we have a problem. It may be that actually it doesn't work. It doesn't protect people. I mean, you know, I've been involved in vaccine work for decades. Right. Not every vaccine that we went after worked. So that's an assumption that it's going to be safe, that it's going to be effective, and that we're going to be able to do it quickly. I think each of those are not only feasible, but maybe likely. That's what I mean when I say by January, we'll do it. But I can't guarantee it. Sure. So what might happen is that people months from now will say, well, you said we were going to have a vaccine in January. I didn't say that. I said we're going to shoot to be able to have one if we're successful at each and every one of these places. And believe me, there's nobody in the world, no matter what they say, from what country, that's going to guarantee you that they're going to have a safe and effective vaccine at any given time frame. They may be cautiously optimistic about it, but nobody's going to guarantee that if they're being honest with you.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the face of America's response to the coronavirus pandemic and the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which ran that study. Dr. Fauci, it's good to see you with some good news to report this morning. You know, you said that remdesivir is not a knockout. This isn't a miracle drug, but it sounds like it is a breakthrough. Can you explain why?
Well, it's a really important proof of concept because this is the first very highly powered, about 1,100 individuals, and it was a placebo-controlled randomized trial, which I've been talking about for some time now, which is really the gold standard of how you prove something is safe and either works or doesn't work. And although the results were clearly positive from a statistically significant standpoint, they were modest. The improvement was 31% better chance of recovering and getting out of the hospital. That's important, but it's the first step in what we project will be better and better drugs coming along, either alone or in combination, drugs of this type and drugs addressing other targets of the virus. So it's good news, but I was very serious when I said this is not the total answer by any means, but it's a very important first step.
The FDA is expected to grant emergency usage for this so that it could be put into practice right away. What do you know about that? How soon do you expect that?
Well, you know, it's going to be really quickly. I was speaking with the commissioner of the FDA yesterday evening, last night, and he's moving along very quickly. They have not made a final decision yet. They have not announced it, but I would project that we're going to be seeing that reasonably soon.
The company that makes the drug has described a very complex process. This is not easy. It's not a pill. It's intravenous. It takes months and months to manufacture. Are you confident that enough can be out there soon enough to make a difference here?
Well, what I'm hearing, Savannah, is that the company is really committed to get it out as much as they can, as quickly as they can. So I would hope that that actually winds up being the case. I'm pretty confident that that will be the case because I believe they're committed to trying to get this out as quickly as possible. So we'll see, but I think it's going to happen.
We've been talking about a treatment. The big picture here, we all are badly wanting a vaccine, as you well know. The administration has confirmed that it has a program called Operation Warp Speed. That's what the administration is calling it, with, according to reports, the goal to speed the timeline for a vaccine to develop hundreds of millions of doses to be ready by January. Do you feel that's in the realm of possibility?
Yeah. You know, I do, Savannah. I mean, I'm obviously part of the team that's involved in that. And the question is, you always have to say you want to get a vaccine that is safe and that's effective and that you can scale up rapidly. So what the plan is right now, as I mentioned to you a couple of times on the show, we're in the early phases of a trial, phase 1. When you go into the next phase, we're going to safely and carefully, but as quickly as we possibly can, try and get an answer as to whether it works and is safe. And if so, we're going to start ramping up production with the companies involved. And you do that at risk. In other words, you don't wait until you get an answer before you start manufacturing. You, at risk, proactively start making it, assuming it's going to work. And if it does, then you could scale up and hopefully get to that timeline. So we want to go quickly, but we want to make sure it's safe and it's effective. I think that is doable.
That's a big,
if things fall in the right place. Yeah.
I was going to say, though, that's a big deal because we've heard you say 12 to 18 months. I mean, January, hundreds of millions of doses that could be ready. I mean, that would be huge.
Right. Well, yeah, but Savannah, remember, go back in time. I was saying in January and February that it would be a year to 18 months. So January is a year. So it isn't that much from what I had originally said. But it's aspirational.
Well, time flies,
I mean,
guess.
When I said a year, that was the...
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the stay-at-home orders. The federal guidelines expire today. Many states are taking steps now to open up their states in different ways. How nervous does that make you as the person who's got their eye on this pandemic?
Well, Savannah, I wouldn't say it makes me nervous, but it makes me, again, committed to the things that I have been speaking about now for a considerable period of time, ever since we got into the mitigation phase, the 30-day guidelines of gradually opening up as we get into now opening up America. Remember, that's a phased process. The first phase we call a gateway. In other words, you've really got to have 14 days of continual diminution in the number of your cases. So if the states and locally follow those guidelines in a gradual way and have the capability of, if you get blips, which we will get blips, Savannah, there's no doubt, when you pull back, there will be cases. And what we need to do is make sure they have in place the capability of identifying, isolating, and contact tracing individuals. If they do that,
and do the states that
I feel cautiously optimistic. I feel cautiously optimistic.
And do the states that are taking those measures,
that will do it.
Yeah. Sorry for the overtalk because we're on our satellite, but just do the states that are taking those steps now, in your mind, have that ability to contact trace and crack down on an outbreak if it starts again?
You know, Savannah, honestly, I can't go state by state with you and say this state is doing this and they have it. The only thing I could do is from 40,000 feet, just continue to urge the ones who don't have that capability to really go very slowly. And those that do, go ahead and go by the guidelines. The guidelines are very, very explicit and very clear. There's a lot of leeway because we give the governors the opportunity to be very flexible, but you have to have the core principles of the guidelines. You can't just leap over things and get into a situation where you're really tempting a rebound. That's the thing I get concerned about. I hope they don't do that.
All right, Dr. Fauci, thank you for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And we should mention that tomorrow morning on Today, we're going to have the first television interview with the CEO of Gilead Sciences. That is the company that makes remdesivir, and that's tomorrow morning on Today.